Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Managing High-Performing Virtual Teams, brought to you by Xero. I'm Gary Dehart, the publisher of Insightful Accountant and host of today's webinar. Our speaker today is Tate Henshaw. Tate has always been obsessed with problem solving, which led him to major in mathematics at the University of Georgia Go Dogs, then on to Polly Clark, and now the co-founder of ARC Management. Whether it's helping design proprietary royalty database, that's a tough one, integrating a cloud-based merchandise fulfillment system for a Grammy winner, or running a net present value calculation on a contract proposal for an NBA All-Star, he's yet to come across a problem he can't solve. And I have to say, these accounting webinars have to be the only time you hear net present value calculations. But so he brings his love of efficiency in cloud accounting landscape via custom curated ecosystems for his clients, which results in additional free time for his passion in music and quality time with his wife and his two daughters. So welcome, Tate. Before I turn it over to you, I do have a couple of housekeeping items. One, CPE is available for this session. And as you know, if you want your CPE, you need to be here for 50 minutes, 50 minutes. And you must participate in at least 3 of the poll questions. We have 4, so you can miss one, but you must participate in 3 and 50 minutes. Those who meet the minimum criteria will receive an email within 24 hours. Usually it goes out it'll go out this evening unless something goes wrong. But you'll get an email within 24 hours with a survey link. Complete that survey. It's like 3 questions. Then you will receive your certificate. If you have any questions, we ask that you put them either in the chat or in the questions panel. And then Tate will get to those towards the end of the session. This is being recorded, and a link will be sent to you tomorrow. And it'll be a link to our YouTube channel where this will be posted. Typically, it takes us about 3 days to get it posted. And then you'll also have a link to the PDF of today's slides. That link I will also put in the chat, and I will also put that PDF in the chat. So 2 ways you'll get it, in the chat or in the email. So that really covers it for housekeeping. So I am going to go ahead and turn this over to Tate. So Tate, thank you for joining us. I will be going off screen now, but I will be here running your polls and here to help if you need me. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. I really appreciate all you guys taking time out of your day to join this session. It's definitely a topic that has generated a lot of interest from a lot of different people when we've gone over this topic. Again, my name's Tate Henshaw. That intro made me sound really smart and important, which I guess is the point of a good bio. But yeah, I'm the co-founder of ARC Business Management in Atlanta. We work with a lot of professional athletes and entertainers, doing a lot of accounting related stuff and some non-related accounting stuff. And I'm also a national Xero ambassador. I've been doing that for the last 5 years, where I just kind of do events like this and present content from a peer perspective for firms and users to be able to hopefully grasp the value of Xero and other applications and softwares. And today we've got a lot to cover. I'm a guy that could probably do 5 slides and do an hour on it. So we've got quite a few more than that. So I'm going to be moving pretty rapidly for me. So hang on, definitely put those questions in the Q&A. If you have any, that we can cover those. Either I'll try to check them when we hit the polling questions to work any of those in, or we'll have hopefully a little bit of time at the end to address some of those. So we're talking about all the things that surround managing remote teams, the virtual setting, what tools do we need to use? How do we have effective communication? How do we build community? You know, kind of that culture gap that can come up when you're in a remote environment. How do we define team performance? How do we manage team performance? Even further from that, how do we define and manage individual performance? You see, we've separated those 2 things out because they are both incredibly important when you're in a remote environment. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump into our content. So first on the docket, considering a virtual setting, right? So I've been working from home off and on since 2009. So I guess you would call me a early adopter or a glutton for punishment, depending on your perspective. But I've really enjoyed a lot of the benefits, but also have experienced a lot of the challenges. Also been managing people in a remote setting, specifically at ARC. For the first 18 months, we didn't have a physical space. Now I am in our physical office today, but I definitely have a lot of experience with managing remote teams and considering a virtual setting. So just moving some of this stuff around so I can see my notes, which is always helpful. So let's talk a little bit about the benefits and the challenges that surround virtual setting. So as far as benefits, you have time and cost savings. You have hopefully increased or at least not decreased productivity and also reduced turnover. So a couple of stats surrounding that. The Global Workplace Analytics estimated that a typical U.S. employer can save an average of $11,000 per half-time remote worker each year. So to reiterate that, $11,000 per half-time remote worker. That implies a full-time remote worker would even create more savings for the company. Now, obviously, there's a lot of variables involved in that. I'm going to assume that this number was pulled before our current inflationary environment, so we can probably safely assume that that could even be more now as we're talking about cost savings. But obviously, rent savings, reduced absences. People may have taken a day off for certain things before that now they don't have to. And hopefully reduced turnover. I think we all could identify with the fact that it's one thing to have a current staff member in a remote environment, but then adding a new person, all the training that goes along with that, the lost productivity, those are increased costs for businesses. Staff members also save between $600 and $6,000 per year, according to the same study, by working at home half-time. Again, so we're talking about a hybrid environment, not even a fully remote environment with these stats. Skipping their commute gives them a lot of time back. Average half-time remote worker saves the equivalent of 11 work days per year in time they would have otherwise spent commuting. I think you can quickly see why, coming out of the pandemic, you had a lot of people that were hesitant to re-enter the workforce on a fully in-person physical basis, right? Talking 11 work days saved. That could be spent with family, that could be spent on a lot of different things. And then remote workers are on average 35 to 40% more productive than their in-office peers. Tend to perform better with 40% fewer mistakes made. According to Forbes, that increase in productivity is due to increased flexibility, including allowing workers to work at times that are more productive for them, rather than strictly adhering to a 9-to-5 schedule and decreased distractions. And then as far as reduced turnover, according to Forbes, 54% of employees want more flexibility and said they would be willing to change jobs to get it. Again, that's Forbes, not, your weird surveyor down the street, saying 54% would change jobs to get more flexibility. So I think that basically speaks for itself. And an offer of remote working resulted in an average of 12% turnover reduction. So a lot of benefits, obviously. We've probably seen these preached and written about and yada, yada, yada. What we see less of, in my opinion, is some of the challenges associated with remote work. And I think part of the reason for this is the fact that we're mostly concentrated on the individual worker versus the team versus the company versus how are we achieving those goals, right? Because when we're talking about increased productivity, we may be talking about this seat and this seat and this seat, and they're getting more things done. What we're not necessarily addressing is, are we getting the right things done? Are we accomplishing the right things? Are we pulling together? Are we all on the same page? And those are totally different questions. So some of those challenges, lack of face-to-face interaction, yes, we can do Zoom, we can do a lot of Meet, Teams. We're going to talk about those tools a little bit later. But even then, you miss some of the body language, some of the, somebody hunched over, or they sitting up straight, or their shoulders back. Do they look confident? Do they look fearful? Do they look nervous? What could be going wrong there? Some of those things that we miss. It's harder to build rapport with those people, right? When you're not having that downtime around the water cooler, at going to get lunch together, just learning about people. And many report feeling more isolated when working remotely, which is definitely understandable. Communication challenges. We're going to talk about communication a lot today, but written communication, which can be the primary method in a remote environment, you lose the tone associated with it. Yes, we're going to talk about how to hopefully combat that with emojis or punctuation or whatever it may be, but nevertheless, it's not the same speaking to someone, and even speaking to someone on the phone is not the same as speaking to them in person. And if you don't have a clear communication plan, it can be hard to know what to expect when you're talking to coworkers. And then there's a tendency to overwork. Now, as an owner, a manager of a firm, it's easy to say, is that really a bad thing for my employees to overwork? But if you end up with burnout, then it can be a really bad thing, right? Because yes, great when they're working extra, but also the quality and the productivity, you have diminishing returns at some point. And we're talking about nearly 70% of these remote workers reported working during the weekend. With that, we finished up our considering a virtual setting, and we're going to actually have our first polling question.
All right, that poll is up, and the question is, which of the following is true when working with remote team members? Vagueness is fine. Body language is often hard to read. There's no real difference between remote and virtual, or it's better to not ask questions. It'll all work out. I'm going with number 4. What do you think, Tate? It'll all work out.
That's definitely a strategy that you could adopt, I will say. I don't know how successful it'll be. It's probably one of those, it'll be great in the short term, but in the long term, maybe not so great.
Yeah, that's actually funny you say that, because I think I've experienced that. So, all right, we're going to wrap this up here. And again, remember, you've got to answer 3 out of 4, minimum 3 out of 4 if you want to get the CPE. So we're going to go ahead and close this out in about 3 seconds. Thanks, Tate.
Awesome. So we've got 12 out of 12. Body language is often hard to read. If nothing else, that tells me that you guys are awake, and I think we made that one pretty easy, hopefully. So now, when we talk about the setting, we need to talk about the tools to use. And one of the things I'll probably say it multiple times is managing in a remote setting is not that different from managing in a physical setting if you're managing in a physical setting correctly, right? Like if you have actual plans and processes and your management style isn't just, licking your finger and putting it up in the wind and hoping you know which way to go, then a lot of these things are going to overlap and be useful no matter what setting you're in. But it becomes even more paramount when you're in a remote setting. So there's a couple of categories that we want to talk about. So we have communication. Now, the next one, we're talking about virtual meetings. Communication is obviously a broad bucket, but there are, different platforms that are all really strong when we're talking about communication. Slack is something that I use in my role at Xero and also in some mastermind groups that I'm a part of. You've got the Google platform with Meet and Chat and Duo and whatever it's called as of today, that are also used pretty prominently at Xero. At ARC, we use Microsoft Teams, which is kind of the new kid on the block, but obviously coming from Microsoft and their history and integrations with their other platforms. And then we also have Skype listed here that could be a fit, but not something that we use currently. And then when we talk about virtual meetings, you can pretty much see we've got some of the same icons here, but Google Meet, we've got our FaceTime logo, which we use sometimes for client communication. Skype again, Zoom, which we're using today. I mean, Zoom is one of those that's followed in the steps of Xerox, right? Which is funny because Xero sometimes gets mistaken for Xerox, but Xerox had such brand recognition that it became a verb, and that's kind of where we are with Zoom now. You want to Zoom, even though you may not be talking about Zoom's platform, you may be talking about a different platform, but it's became kind of a verb for virtual meetings. So all of those are great. And when we get to the communication section, we'll talk a little bit more about which ones to use in which settings. Spoiler alert, we're going to use a lot of them a lot. Now, document management. This is something that is very different when you're operating in a remote setting than when you're in a physical space. Saying you're going to manage documents in a file cabinet when your staff is spread out across multiple states and you don't have a centralized location becomes very interesting, right? Are you saying you're going to have it at the individual employees' locations or what? Now, thankfully, there are a lot of good options for document management. We've got some listed here: Box, Dropbox, Google Suite, with kind of using Google Drive. That's one of the main methods that Xero uses. Definitely come across Dropbox and Box quite often, dealing with different vendors. Office 365 is our solution, which is a combination of OneDrive and SharePoint for us. And then with clients, you have options. These are both Xero products, but HubDoc, which is great for organizing files and also tying them to actual general ledger transactions, whether that be, bills, invoices, checks, different things of that nature. And also Xero has its own file structure, Xero Files, that you can store files in that your client can also access and be in a secure environment as well. So document management, really important. Things to consider there. How do you need, what kind of sharing capabilities do you need? What kind of integrations do you need? Like for us, using Teamwork for document management is something that it will be beneficial if our document management solution syncs with our project management software, right? So those are kind of the different considerations, but all of these are good options. for you. Project management, huge deal when we're talking about remote working. When you are in a physical space, it's really easy for me right now to open this door and shout over and ask one of my employees, did this get done? Did that get done? Hear what they're talking about, understand, oh, I don't know if they really understand that. I'm not sure they get their priorities. In a remote environment, that's not possible. I mean, in theory it is if you want to call everybody multiple times a day and just do catch ups, but then you end up wasting a lot of time. So ideally, a good project management solution is going to add a ton to your productivity and to your management capabilities in a virtual environment. So we've got a couple of examples. Jira, Asana is used at Xero. Trello has been used at Xero at different times. Practice Ignition is great project management for engagements and billing. And then XPM is a Xero product for project management as well. And like I said, we use at ARC, we actually use Teamwork for project management. Okay, and then the other thing with the tools, I always go back to my Bill Gates quote: when you apply software to an inefficient process, you amplify the inefficiency. The first part is if you apply automation to an efficient process, you enhance the efficiency. So here we need to think about processes and policies around our staff working remotely so that when we introduce these tools, that we're going to amplify the efficiency. So some of the baseline things that we're talking about are like ensure the personal computers are updated with anti-malware. Now, a big thing we could probably have a whole session on is, are your staff using personal computers? Are you providing computers? And that's really going to depend on the type of firm you're looking to build. Are you using a bunch of contractors? Are you all, full-time employees? What kind of capabilities do you have as far as IT to manage, multiple devices? We use Rippling for our payroll, and they actually have a device management service that they provide that we actually use to help us with that, as well as an outsourced IT provider. Making sure client files don't show up on personal computers, having security policies to keep financial data safe. And these seem like no-brainers, I guess is how I would describe it, but really they're not no-brainers if you don't make it a no-brainer. And the only way you can do that is by establishing it up front with all of your team members where they understand, they sign off. So it also helps, in the case something does go wrong, you have backup for the client, for insurance provider, whoever it is, to say, these are the policies we set up. We made sure everyone opted into these so that they're acknowledging this process, right? So that's a little bit about the tools. Just making sure, 1, 2, okay. And from there, we're going to go into communication. Probably going to spend a good bit of time here, just because communication is one of the most important things, if not the most important things. You could argue for any business, but certainly a remote business. We've got to communicate expectations. This is huge. Think about things like response time. How quickly should team members expect responses from each other? What you don't want is this weird, I messaged this person, I didn't hear back, and then you immediately go to, are they not working? Are they at their kid's baseball game? Are they, sleeping in? Are they leaving early? what's that? And it goes along with availability. How should people indicate when they're available? That's something we're still working on, but like in Teams, you can show if you're available, do not disturb if you're out of the office. And that just helps when you can't look over and see someone to know if they're available. And then thinking about which tools are used for what, right? Like, are we saying Slack is internal, emails external? Is the project management tool where you're talking about updates? You make a comment on the task, you send a Teams message. When do we need to set up a Zoom call? All those things need to be thought through and not left to chance as much as possible. I think we all know that even if you don't leave anything to chance, you're still going to run into things that you didn't anticipate. So the more things you can address up front, the better off you're going to be. And we've got our Dunder Mifflin meme here when the meeting could have been an email. This is kind of where you can like overcorrect, I guess I should say, and get in a remote environment and say, well, we don't have this built-in communication. So what we're going to do is we're going to have 8 meetings per day, stand-up meetings, to make sure everyone's on the same page. Now, obviously, the problem there is no one gets anything done in that scenario, right? So there's a couple things when we think about meetings that we really need to address. Meeting format, what length and timing is required. For us, we have bi-weekly updates. They're scheduled for 30 minutes. They don't go over 30 minutes. They're not for doing a deep dive into individual scenarios. Therefore, what has been done in the last 2 weeks, what needs to be done in the next 2 weeks, are we missing anything? Does anyone need help? Move on. If you run into issues, we table them, we take them offline, and whoever the correct people are going to have a one-on-one there and not waste the other, 5, 8, 10 people's time. If there's not an agenda for the meeting, should you have a meeting? A lot of people would say no. Now, there's some scenarios, trying to be creative, you're trying to brainstorm. Maybe you don't have a detailed agenda, but still, what are we thinking about? What's the purpose of this time? And think about the timing of the meeting as well. Is 4 o'clock on a Friday really going to be the best time when you need people to be super detail oriented? I would say for me, the answer would be no, right? And attendees, who really needs to be there? If there's people who may benefit, may not, maybe you want to list them as optional, let them look at your agenda and decide if they want to attend or not. I think that's always good that different leaders could pop in to keep everybody, honest and on their toes, but not that they will be there every single week, because it may just not be feasible. When we're talking about meeting frequency, consider, organization-wide meetings should be very high level. And then team meetings should address the team goals. One-on-ones should address individual goals. Now, that makes sense when we say it, but how many meetings have you been a part of where it's an organization-wide meeting and you spend 10 or 15 minutes talking about some super obscure, detailed thing that only really applies to one person? And that, as leaders, is a lot of our job to police that, keep people on track, but understand that, yes, we're valuing what you're saying and we want to address this, but this isn't the right setting to address it in, right? So that's a couple things when we think about communication, and we specifically think about team meetings. Now let's talk a little bit about building community. This goes right along with communication, and it's one of the things that you will see written about a good bit when we talk about remote teams is, how do I make sure the culture is right? And there's a couple things to think about there. Getting to know each other. this can happen passively in an in-person environment, but in a remote environment, it has to be intentional. That's just a fact. So scheduling things, virtual coffee breaks, lunches, happy hours, you know, maybe you do some personality tests, some things that could help you as a leader, but are not necessarily directly work related. Also, just having some fun, brainstorm, some ways that could be fun, to fun things to do with your team. Building in some social channels into your platform. On Zero Slack, you've got book clubs, you've got crypto channels, you've got pet picture channels, you've got sports channels, all these things where people can discuss non-work related activities, and that helps to start to build that community, right? If any of you guys have specific examples of that, would love for you to throw some of those in the chat that we could hopefully could benefit everyone else. I've got my notebook to take some notes if you've got some new ideas for that. And then third, learning together. This can be a great way for multiple reasons. Co-learning opportunities, you go through some of those same scenarios. It creates discussion points for your team members. It's also great, depending on the size of your organization, bring someone in from a different team to show another team what they do, maybe a specific knowledge that they have. And that's going to help not only build community, but help your organization pull together and understand, oh, this is something that I can leverage these other people for. I can bring them in to make me look good, for example. Have a team member teach something, doesn't even have to be professional. We were out in Denver for our Zero kickoff, and there were people doing line dancing and breathing exercises and all kind of cool stuff. And it was built into the breaks and it was optional, but it was pretty cool to allow people to connect on a different level. Okay. Let me see here. Beer tastings once a week. That's amazing. Oh, and I'm catching up on questions. Practice management software I use is called Teamwork, teamwork.com. Keep those questions coming in. Really appreciate it, guys. Yeah, and I said throw it in the chat. I should have said throw it in the Q&A box. Apologies there. This is a Zoom faux pas or party foul. All right, so let's rock and roll. I've got to get you your questions, or I'm going to be in big trouble with Gary. So I've got to keep going. So the other thing, we talked about setting expectations. Part of that is defining team performance, right? And we're going to give you a couple different frameworks to think about. None of these have to be the one you use, but we want to give you some different options, see which one works best for you, for your organization, for your individual team. So one of the most important things you're going to need to do is create a foundation of psychological safety. So making people feel included, feel safe to learn, safe to be vulnerable, safe to challenge. We need that productive communication in a remote environment where things can easily slip between the cracks. How do you do that? We've got to make it a priority, communicate that it's a priority, establish norms for failure to say, not make people afraid that they're about to be fired if they make a minor mistake, right? Intentionally create space for new ideas. I was talking about some of that brainstorming earlier, and embrace productive conflict. The only way you can do that is to actually take constructive criticism as a leader and show that you're taking that on, that it's valuable to you, so that you will over time continue to get that from your team And that also creates a scenario where your team is more willing to take it from you. So once we define team performance, how do we manage it? Peter Drucker, it's kind of a big deal. And he said, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. That's absolutely true. So how do we manage this kind of performance? We've got to set goals, right? Organization goals, team level goals, individual goals. A lot of times we do this in the opposite order. If we don't set organization goals, how in the world are we setting team goals? And if we don't set team goals, how in the world are we setting individual goals, right? So make sure that you're taking the time to do this from the top down. This is just an example of a goal sheet from a zero example of, team initiatives. And it's one page. That doesn't mean it's easy to do, but what it does mean is it doesn't have to be super complicated and look like a dictionary, right? Once we do manage and define team performance, now we need to move to the individual level. So we got 3 basic needs: competence, autonomy, and relatedness. I feel capable, I have choices, and I feel connected, right? This is super important that you're setting your people up for success. This is something that we could talk about all day, but making sure you're addressing each one of those factors for your team members will really help you manage them. The individual goals need to be SMART goals, which we've now added aligned to the end, which is great, but sounds terrible. SMART goals and SMARTA goals just don't quite have the same ring to it. But understanding you're not creating a goal that is like, bring in more business. That's cool, but it's not specific. It is somewhat measurable, but is it attainable? How much are we really talking about? Is it relevant? What's the timing around that? Is it aligned with the overall organization goals? If not, it's not a good goal. Example of individual goals here, you can see it looks similar to the team goal, but it's not the same. But we just have, what is the purpose of the role? I think that's a super important question to answer for each one of your team members. And then you can come up with quarterly goals. How do you measure it? And what I really like is quarterly learning goals. So we're giving them some opportunities to grow in their role as well. All right, so that was really quick run through that, but we do have our next polling question. I know some of you guys were getting nervous and thought I'd forgotten you, but I promise I will not. So what does the A stand for in SMART goals is our question here.
And then Tate, I don't know if you were in the Atlanta area, but at MARTA, their slogan used to be "It's SMARTA."
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
But, so MARTA was way cutting edge, right? They were ahead of the curve.
Yeah. I know this is being recorded, so I should be careful what I say, but I don't know if that's the organization we want to model our productivity off of. I'll just say that.
maybe we have somebody on the line here who's from the Northeast. Maybe it's like a Boston thing. It's SMARTA.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
I don't often get mistaken for Boston accent, I will say, Gary, believe it or not.
Probably not. All right, we're going to close this out and thank you all.
All right. Oh, virtual activity race over the summer was another one I'm catching up. That sounds really cool, Shauna. Okay, we're back at it. Like I said, just got a lot of material here. So we have aligned here. Now, I don't know if we should, that was the last day, I thought. have attainable. There's two A's in SMATA, so that's kind of a tricky question. That's okay. We don't have to get them right. We just have to answer them. So that's a good thing for us. So giving productive feedback, again, really important. The fact that you're not able to look over someone's shoulder and see what they're doing. You need to have a mechanism to be able to give feedback. So feedback can definitely be scary. You know, if you tell someone you've got feedback for them, if you're in a management role, that can automatically cause, tensing up and anxiety and all those kind of things. That doesn't mean it doesn't need to be, that conversation doesn't need to be had. It absolutely needs to be had. And so, your team members need different things depending on what state they're in. We've got a couple of examples here. Maybe they don't understand what they need, what needs to be done. Maybe, they feel like they're in a hostile work environment for different reasons. Maybe they just don't feel valued. All those things are important for us as managers and leaders to understand. So how do we create this environment for productive feedback? Empathy is a requirement, really, to have a productive feedback loop, if you will. And so both rational, recognizing the other person's thought, seeing another point of view, imagining their experience, putting yourself in their shoes, but also emotional intelligence and empathy. Listen without judgment. Understand why they might be upset. Understand it could be something not even work related that's causing them to be upset, to be in different emotions. And so if we start there, we have a lot more chance of success to get honest and open communication flowing, which is our goal. Brene Brown, some of you might have heard of her. She's written a few books and sold a few. This quote, sometimes speaking the truth feels like we're being unkind, especially when sharing difficult information or feedback. But in reality, dancing around the truth is unkind. When we avoid stating the truth, when we're vague or ambiguous under the guise of being kind, it's often because we are trying to lessen the discomfort for ourselves, not for the other person. That's so true. A lot of times we avoid the potentially controversial conversations because we don't want to go through that awkwardness or that pain, if you will. But that's really not serving our team members well in that scenario. And I actually just thought of a conversation that perhaps I've been avoiding, so I'm not immune to this either. Another big resource that we looked at when we were talking about this topic is Radical Candor, which is a book by Kim Scott, or more of a concept by Kim Scott that she made into a book. And really, if you think about this will explain a lot about the communication, the feedback, the empathy, all those kind of things. So we've got our 4 quadrants, and the 2 axes are caring personally and challenging directly. And ideally, we want both of those. When both of those are in play, then we have a good scenario. When only one of them's in play or neither of them are in play, we have less optimal. So when we're challenging, but we don't care personally, we have obnoxious aggression. And that is problematic, right? You're just going in, you're cleaning house, you're doing whatever it is, but you're not understanding where that person's coming from, what the ramifications are for them. There's not a lot of empathy happening. And then when you're not doing either one, which is, spoiler alert, that's pretty bad. That's called manipulative insincerity. So if you think about it, you don't care personally about your team member, but you're also not willing to challenge them directly. So maybe you're being passive aggressive, but also not worrying about what the person is doing or who they are. When we care personally, but we don't challenge directly, we have ruinous empathy. That's not good, because now you care personally, but you're almost protecting them against themselves. You're not letting them know when they're doing something wrong, where they need to improve, what the expectations are. And this always, in my experience, ends up bubbling over in a really bad way at some point. If someone's kind of a little bit off, you don't correct it, they get more, they get more, they get more, they get more, then it blows up. And they come back and say, why didn't you tell me I was off back here? Well, because you weren't willing to challenge them directly. You weren't willing to have that smaller, difficult conversation. Now you've created a much bigger problem. So when you are willing to challenge directly and care personally, that's radical candor. So radical candor is not, hey, I'm just going to blow you up on blast. I'm not just going to come in and clean house, but neither am I going to protect you from yourself. I'm going to care about you and challenge you. And this is really helpful in a remote environment, because you don't always have the luxury of having lots of time to sit there and go through things, sit across from each other at the coffee shop and do small talk, and then over time get into whatever your topic is. Sometimes you have to be, pretty summarized and pretty direct to be able to operate in that kind of environment. So we're coming up on our third polling question, Gary. Which quadrant is considered ideal in Kim Scott's feedback model? So we'll give you guys a couple more seconds. As a reminder, you have to participate in 3 out of 4 of these polling questions to get your CPE. So don't blame me or Gary if you didn't participate. We told you. That's radical candor. I'm challenging you directly because I care about you, because I want you to get your CPE certificate, right?
That's not obnoxious aggression.
It's not. No, it's I care about all the participants getting their CPE for sure.
Perfect. Well, I do too, but I'm going to close it out anyway. So here we go.
All right. So I obviously kind of gave the question away there with my comment, but I think most of you guys got it. It is radical candor. So we've got a few minutes left. Just want to wrap up. This is a huge topic. This was a lot of information in an hour-long time period. We probably could have done a whole day session on this. But really, there's a couple of things you want to think about. Really stop and consider what it means to work remotely. Look at it from a bird's eye view. What are the benefits? What are the challenges? What are the tools that are needed? And make sure, to the extent possible, that you're not taking things for granted. Oh, well, they'll just do this. They've been doing it when we're in the office. They'll do it when they're at home. Will they? I don't know. I mean, down to how are we going to receive mail, right? how are people going to talk to each other? Are we letting them control that, or do we want to have a framework for them? And then once you've considered and really thought about possible issues and challenges, make a plan to help your team succeed. Set clear goals. Be sure to motivate. Part of the way you motivate is you continually communicate, hopefully effectively. I always love to see that. Don't just communicate effectively, communicate the things you want to get across, and then really work on building that community, helping everyone to understand where you're going, how are you pulling together, all those kind of things. And you'll have access to this, but some of the resources that we mentioned today, Radical Candor, Kim Scott, Dare to Lead, Brene Brown, and some of the earlier things we were talking about actually come from Ideal Team player Patrick Lencioni, who is, I've read many of his books and they're all pretty awesome. I think we've got one more polling question, and then we can get into any questions that any of you guys had.
So yeah, we do have one more, and that is, as we mentioned on the front end, Zero is the sponsor of this event, and so it's pretty straight up. Would you like to hear from Zero, about the products, or one of the reps, just to learn a little bit more about the product? And while we do that, I'm going to ask you a question, Tate, that is Zero specific. As kind of going through all of this, obviously Zero invested a lot of time and effort and money to pull this together. Does Zero have resources similar to what you've just talked about for like their advisors? Are there resources that they can pull on if, let's say, I'm a Zero advisor?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gary. So Zero, one of the unique things I think about Zero is, for me, I'm in an interesting position of being a partner and sort of a resource as well. So we not only have account managers, but we also have partner consultants who do things like workflow reviews, to be able to come in and say, hey, here's best practices that we've seen from the other firms that we're working with, which to me is similar from how we as partners and advisors deal with our clients, right? We're saying it's not necessarily that we know all the best things. We've seen it on multiple levels from different people. See, these are the things that seem to work best. And so that is one of those resources, is a workflow consultation with a partner consultant who has accounting experience and industry experience in some cases, to be able to come in, speak the partner's language, and advise on different options to optimize their workflow. And part of that analysis will obviously be, what kind of setting are the partners in? Are they in person? Are they virtual? Are they a large firm with multiple locations? All those, are they franchise? And all those things will dictate different tools and methods that can be implemented. The other thing that Zero offers is, consultations with people like me, with different ambassadors, and we try to coordinate it with the person who's going to be the best fit for them. And it could be a similar firm size, a similar structure, similar geographic area, similar industry, to be able to come in and give them, that real world advice that, your salesperson told you this is how it worked. Well, I'm going to tell you, I've got X number of clients and it does work, or maybe it doesn't work, but give them the honest feedback and advice from a peer perspective.
Okay. So there was one question that came in that I did want to throw out there, and I'm going to try to abbreviate it, but on the security side, you threw out some good things on, now I'm not abbreviating, now I'm talking on, but I'm going to add to the question, but you threw out some things about, ensuring that you've got, if it's a personal laptop, either, what your policy is. The large majority of your peers, right, and of the accounting profession are in small firms, and that's one or two people, and who's going to do that? I mean, how do you, somebody's got to be in charge of it or it's not going to happen, right? Or you have to outsource it.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I know different people do different things, obviously, which is not a great answer, but I will say one of the things that's interesting when we talk about tools as part of the conversation is a lot of these tools are expanding into different areas, such as, Augusto expanding into more HR capabilities, or in our case, a Rippling who does our payroll, they also expand into the device management. So they actually set it up for us. Now we do have someone in the firm who wears that hat, so to speak, as in they're responsible for it. But they have a lot of tools at their disposal through these other providers to be able to do things like lock computers down, eliminate access for people immediately if needed. And part of that also comes from the tools we use like a LastPass for password management. Having that kind of gatekeeper to where we can monitor access to different folders, different things, and then also quickly eliminate them. So to kind of answer your question, we do have someone responsible for that, but they're not doing all the legwork, which in a smaller firm, we're 9 people, so we're a big small firm, maybe you would say.
Right.
But in a small firm environment, being able to leverage technology providers is almost a must, because even though you're small, you can't forego something like security. So to reiterate, we use Rippling for device management, and they not only monitor, but they also can set up devices, mail them out, all this kind of stuff. But then we also have currently an outsourced IT provider that's kind of monitoring in real time what's going on with the individual machines. So we kind of have a both and.
And then a follow up on that, I think, one thing you just said about the vendor community, right? And the technology providers about, what, I would be willing to bet that, 95% of the people who have any technology, whatever it is, use it to, 2% of its capability. And I had a conversation with ADP somewhat recently, and their Accountant Connect program, I had no idea, but it is full of services and offerings, and it's all free, right? Nothing's free, but it's all part of in their Accountant Connect program. So I imagine most vendors have things like that. Maybe it's just a matter of getting your sales rep on the phone if there is one, or getting on the website and figuring out, hey, what is available? How can you help me as my vendor?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And ADP is a great example. I mean, everything from retirement plans, HR, there's so many. That's a deep well of services that they provide. And I think it's what you said, plus doing the best you can to get in a good community of peers. Like I'll go to my peers and say, hey, here's what I'm dealing with. What do you guys know about it? And one thing that you can count on is if they've had a bad experience, they will let you know immediately. Right. And that can save you a ton of time versus you going down the same road. So I think the salesperson, do your own research, get in a peer community can really help you not waste a whole ton of time, because there's so many options now, right? It can be overwhelming.
Yep. And then before we wrap it up, it's funny enough, I was in the dark room back here and you were talking about security in your presentation, I received an email from the IRS, and not a bad one, but it's about Security Summit just released new data security plan. And it is an outline of your WISP, was it Written Information Security Plan, and which I don't know all the details of it, but I guess if you're dealing in taxes and you're dealing with IRS, you've got to have a written security plan, right? And so
especially if there's a problem.
Right. Yeah. And so they literally, let's see if I can cut and paste this. I'm going to put this in the chat just because, again, everybody needs one. And I know we need one as well ourselves, just because of it makes sense to have. But we're also going to be writing about this in Tax Practice News and Insightful Accountant, because again, everybody needs it. Even if it's not mandated, you need to have some level of security in mind. So
Absolutely. And it just goes along with what I was talking about earlier. Have a plan and then figure out the tools that work with that plan. But usually the opposite is less ideal. Here's this tool. Oh, wait, where do I use this tool versus this other tool? And that applies to security, communication, project management, etc. Figure out what you need to accomplish, and then figure out what tools you can implement to help automate that or make it more scalable or more efficient.
that might even be a smarter goal.
Yeah.
All right, I'm assuming you'll be at XeroCon in a couple of weeks.
I will be. I mean,
Right.
that's the greatest peer community I know of.
Yeah, it's last time I went to it, was a fantastic show. So I look forward to being there as well. Hopefully we can connect. I'm going to shoot you an email because we do want to try to record some podcasts while we're there. Hopefully I can get you.
Absolutely.
So, but again, so Tate Henshaw, CFP, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and this presentation with us. All you who did join, thank you. Thanks for sticking out with us for about an hour. So everybody have a great
Thank you,
week.
guys.
Thanks.